Welcome to the first part of our lecture for bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is oftentimes known as the fourth branch of the government. Sometimes they call it a sub-government because of some of the options that they can do and the powers that they have with creating regulations and enforcing those regulations. A lot of people feel like the bureaucracy it is so massive and so large that it's difficult for the president to be fully in control of the bureaucracy. Okay, this is a slide that we looked at in class, and we kind of discussed what each one of these meant, and it's kind of the how the bureaucracy is established and set up under the president. So this, make sure you go back and look at what we talked about in class on this. So we're going to go a little quick kind of overview of that. You have your departments. You need to think of these departments. This would be your cabinet. These are like holding companies, okay? They are there to do a certain job. They are an umbrella organization. There are lots of agencies under each individual department. So departments typically are going to be your cabinet affiliates here. They work at the pleasure of the president. They are specific in policy areas. So you have justice, criminal law, state, treasury, defense. This is what we're talking about when we deal with the departments when it comes to cabinets. And then you have your independent agencies. These are going to be slightly more removed from the president. The president's going to be more hands-off. There is in some of these areas that are independent agencies, there's going to be a little more protection from political influence, and that is by design. The first one is going to be your executive agencies. This is like CIA, NASA, SBA, Bureau Business Association, SSA, Social Security, NEA, National Endowments for the Arts, Peace Corps, are all executive agencies. So they are independent. They are not in a cabinet position. They are the level of a cabinet position, but for various reasons are not put into cabinet areas. But they can be fired by the president. The heads of these can be fired by the president. They have to get Senate approval, but the president is a little more hands-off, and he is not as influential in their day-to-day operations. Another one is the government corporations. This is Amtrak. This is the Tennessee Valley Authority for Electric. It is also the biggest one. The biggest government corporation is the United States Postal Service. They are providing a service that can be done by the private sector and oftentimes is, but because it's a government corporation, it is doing so at a lower rate. So that's the reason the United States Postal Service is so much cheaper to ship through than, say, UPS or FedEx. It's because they are the structure, the infrastructure of the government to help them. And then you have your independent regulatory commissions. These are regulatory, meaning they are regulating some aspect. Now, EPA is an executive agency, but they do a lot of regulations as well. But the EPA is a single head agency, and commissions have a group. These individuals are much harder to fire. You have to have cause to get rid of independent regulatory commissions or commissioners or heads of these agencies. They are going to do regulating of some part of our government system, our economy, or society at large. So this is the Federal Reserve. This is the EPA would kind of fall in here just because they do the regulations. You have the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission. You have the FFC, or the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, the SEC, Security and Exchange, that's stock market, the EEOC, it's Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, etc. So these are much more protected from politics. Politics in their firings does not come into play as much as other agencies. Okay, now we're going to talk about interest groups and the bureaucracy. we have discussed this before when we talked actual interest groups and as well as when we talked government, and this is going to be that iron triangle. So this is the sub-government, this is the interest group, this is the bureaucratic agency, and then this is your subcommittee in Congress, all working together, or not together sometimes, to get policy passed and implemented. Now, interest groups are going to be working to get the policy implemented to benefit them. Bureaucracy is going to be listening to these interest groups who are representing the industry on what is working and what is not, and if changes need to be made in how it's being implemented. And because Congress writes the laws so vaguely, bureaucracy has a lot of discretion on how that happens. But it's also known as the sub-government. Definitely make sure you understand what each part gives to the others. And then many times when you have a very large issue like healthcare reform or a change in economic policy or change in environmental policies or like immigration policies, like these big, huge like issues that we deal with as the country, they oftentimes, that iron triangle, there's lots of iron triangles dealing with it, which then morphs into what's called an issue network. At the heart is an iron triangle, but it expands into this web of multiple interest groups, multiple bureaucratic agencies, multiple subcommittees in various parts of Congress, plus think tanks, university research centers, a president might be involved, or representatives for the president. You have a lot more players here that are trying to help solve this issue. But interest groups, this is how they are going to try to exert their influence on the bureaucracy, is to make that policy implementation very favorable to them. This also can lead to the revolving door, because the bureaucratic agency, they are working with the lobbyist for the interest group, and that connection, that relationship that forms oftentimes means that a person will go work for the lobby group, and or within the industry themselves, and then certain administrations will tap them to come work in the bureaucratic agency. And then when their time is up in the bureaucratic agency, because you have an administration change, they go back into the industry and work. That can lead to conflict of interest, because are they going to represent, when they're in the bureaucratic agency, the needs and the benefit and the the good of the country as a whole, or are they going to only be focusing on their interest, their industry that they are representing and that they used to work for? So presidents oftentimes, President Obama was very well known in his first term for trying to do something about the revolving door, stop that from happening. But it's really hard to do, because lobbyists rely on the knowledge of those former bureaucrats on how the system works, and the bureaucrats rely on the lobbyists on getting information. So that relationship gets very, very complicated. And then sometimes you have to deal with what's called agency capture, in which an interest group basically captures the bureaucratic agency, and now they are going to be working to, the bureaucratic agency is going to be implementing policy that is solely benefiting the interest group, and maybe not necessarily what the administration wants or what is the true benefit to the people. So they become very protective of the interest group or the industry that they are to be regulating, and therefore they are not doing a good enough job, or they overlook questionable activities by the industry because of that relationship that they have established. And then finally, it's called going native, which basically means that the interest group is not listening and not paying attention to what the administration wants them to do. And they are solely operating on their own interest and what they think is best, and not necessarily what the administration wants. Now, key legislation when it comes to bureaucracy, you need to understand the Pendleton Act. Instead of appointing bureaucrats to all of these jobs in the bureaucracy, and therefore you get that political patronage, we are now going to use a merit system. So we've established that people are going to be hired based on their merit versus just their political leanings and who they might know. Then we have the Hatch Act. The Hatch Act applies to the executive branch and bureaucratic agencies in particular, because they technically are a part of the executive branch. But any employee of the executive branch, bureaucratic agency especially, cannot engage in partisan politics while on the job. So if they are on duty for their job, they cannot participate in partisan politics. They cannot campaign for a candidate. They can't go out and to a rally during work hours, those sorts of things. There are some people that are exempt from the Hatch Act. The president and the vice president are exempt. And there are some people who, even when they're not on duty, cannot engage in partisan politics, and that would be the director of the FBI, the director of the CIA, and other high-level intelligence officers, due to the fact that they have access to a lot of highly classified information that might signal to people, if they see this partisan politics, a person supporting one side, one person or another, or one party and then another, that would signal to people that, they must know something. And it may not. Oftentimes it wouldn't, but just the perception means that those individuals cannot participate at any time while they are holding that job. All right, so legislative oversight on the bureaucracy. And remember, this is a big thing for Congress to have, is this oversight. So basically, legislative oversight is that the Congress, legislative branch Congress, is going to look at how the bureaucracy is implementing their laws, how they are enforcing those laws, and determine if the law is working the way Congress intended, whether or not the bureaucracy is implementing it the way it was intended. And if not, then they're going to change how they're doing those things. This is their investigative power in Congress. So what does that mean for the bureaucracy? Well, they've got some tools. The legislative branch has some tools when it comes to the oversight of the bureaucracy. First and foremost, every time is budget. That is the power of the purse. Budget, 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 budget. The budget is all about the bureaucracy. Every agency, that's where it's tied to. So if they are not doing what Congress wants them to do, then Congress can mess with their budget a little bit. And of course they don't want that. They can hold hearings. They can have investigative hearings. They can just have oversight hearings and call in the agency heads and have them testify. Other employees can come in and testify. You'll have interest groups that'll come in and testify on implementation and other issues that they may be seeing. They can change the structure or the jurisdiction of bureaucratic agencies. So they can, move an agency from outside of a cabinet position into a cabinet. That changes their jurisdiction. That changes their level of independence. You can also change what they get to deal with. Like, what are they dealing with? You can change overall what their specialty is, for a lack of a better word. And then you have the GAO and the CBO. So GAO is going to be a review. Both of these terms came up when we talked budget. The GAO is the Government Accountability Office, or the Government Accounting Office, in which they are tracking, they're going to audit these agencies and see how they're spending their money. Are you spending it the way you're supposed to? Is there any, money going missing, or are you overspending? Those sorts of things. And of course, the CBO is going to have the estimates of the cost of all these programs. Congress is going to use that. It's estimated to cost this much. GAO says it should be, this much. Typically, those numbers are fairly close to each other. And all of a sudden, the agency is not in that ballpark. They're going to question that. Why it doesn't work? Well, because Congress writes really vague laws. So Congress gets upset on how it gets implemented, but the bureaucracy gets a lot of discretion in how they implement those laws. And therefore, they, have a lot of leeway. And so as much as Congress wants to be like, you didn't do it the way we intended, well, then write a clearer law, which they can't, because then it's going to be like you tightened us into such a small spot that we have all these other areas that we can't address now because the law doesn't pertain to those. So they intentionally write the laws vague, but then sometimes Congress gets frustrated because it gets implemented very inaccurately or not on the basis of what Congress wanted. All right, so this wraps up part 1 for the bureaucracy. If you have any questions, let me know.